Moral purity is boring, be it in stories or characters or fictional environments in general. It doesn't bring anything new, it doesn't push for layered interpretation, and it just hands you a clean slate with nothing more to dissect. But it's something a lot of people use as a standard for judging stories and characters. Lelouch Britannia has recently fallen victim to set standards of judgment. For the first time ever, I actually engaged in a debate with another person concerning character writing, and it really just reaffirmed why I had been avoiding such spaces for a long time. Podgias's protagonist was being critiqued and held to a standard that, once traced to its roots, wasn't really about his writing quality at all. Today I want to talk about what that thread actually revealed when I got to the bottom of it, and how it relates to moral purity being used as a one-dimensional checklist standard for craft, where personal values are often conflated with writing critique. Oh yeah, I like breaking down ideas sequentially for better understanding, so we'll explore this across two main overarching chapters. First, I want to introduce the lens this whole video is going to walk through, and it sets a running benchmark for what I'm trying to explore. Lelouch is one of my favorite characters, but I just want to establish that the whole idea being looked into here is much bigger than him. In many ways, you could call him a stepping stone. I know I did say moral purity is boring, but it's much more nuanced than that. The statement in and of itself is just one facet of a whole narrative that's rarely been allowed to take root as common ground in the anime media community. Moral standards are real and valuable, and you will never catch me advocating against them. We should all have these, and we all do. They are a massive pillar in defining who we are as people and the way we interact with stories. Over time, we've come to share a majority of set standards collectively in order to bring a sense of order to society as a whole, which is very much necessary, mind you. With how conventional they become once they're adopted by a broader group of people, it's a lot easier to use them as fact. In a way, if everyone agrees on it, then it's most likely true, and anyone who diverges from public consensus is to be pressed. Knowing these standards have an influence on us as people, like I insinuated earlier, they also play a role in how we interpret the actions of others, no less others in fictional stories. Since they are set and relatively easy to follow, they become the default criteria for judgment. We find it much easier to evaluate stories and characters through moral lenses than actually tracking their actions, philosophies, and ideologies narratively. And there's a reason I've used variants of the word easy twice. It's intentional on my part. Actually sitting and doing the mental work it takes to understand complex characters who don't fit cleanly into black or white moral dimensions is difficult and not very appealing. So a lot of us take the quickest way out: moral intellectualism. The whole process is exemplified for a lot of people by weighing up a character's actions through our own personal moral standards. If they don't align with what we consider good, we tend to dismiss them not just as bad people but bad characters, merging those two very distinct cores into a single one. This, of course, relieves you of a very tedious back and forth operation required to trace whether a character's actions make logical sense within a story's established narrative. There's a difference between an action being morally right or wrong, and that action making complete sense as a byproduct of past events and established benchmarks. As such, it is actually really common that some actions by specific characters are invisible within certain narratives. Something else I do want to mention before proceeding concerns personal preferences and kind of addresses a counter-argument I hear very often. Remember, I said these standards play a part in our formation as people and are also important in establishing order in society as a whole. I stand by that, and they do kind of get embedded within our personalities, which then dictates whether we root for certain characters or not. It is completely fine not to like a character whose values don't align with yours. That comes down to personal preference. Those values you hold so dear wouldn't have much of a footing in who you are if they could so easily be swayed or adjusted to fit any and all characters. Liking or hating a character being based on whether you consider them a good or bad person as stated by your moral values is something that needs no justification. People are allowed to make such decisions. Where this does become quite troubling is when we conflate not liking a character or the things they do with them being badly written. Personal taste cannot be used as a final verdict on practical craft standards that have been curated over decades to fit the time periods they're in. These are norms that have gone through rigorous trial and error by multiple great minds within the writing space as a whole to get to where they are today. I really don't think any contributors to that entire endeavor will be very enthusiastic about seeing the benchmarks they've worked so hard to maintain and evolve belittled in favor of conventional moral values. I need an actual example for you to see this whole process in action, so we have a concretized idea of what it actually does to complex characters and narratives that have been crafted with so much care. At the start of the video, I mentioned getting into a real debate for the first time with another person concerning character writing. I'm not going to mention the person's name or where the debate took place. I really want them to remain anonymous because they are not particularly central to what I'm arguing here, but I'm more of a proof of concept. So this person's central claim is that Lelouch's sister Nonole is an exception from his philosophy of the ends justify the means. Therefore, his philosophy and he as a person are hypocritical. They go on to try and strengthen the argument with different citations, explanations, a lot of shenanigans I'm not really going to get into because I've already done a lot of back and forth with them and it wasn't particularly fruitful. But they do mention a specific quote that kind of sums up their whole point. The ends only justify the means when it doesn't involve Nonole. Pretty cool, by the way. It then goes on to compare Lelouch to Kiritsugu, spoiler 1 for anyone who hasn't watched Fate Zero, who sacrificed not just his colleagues but also his family, his wife and child, all in service to his cause. To his debater, and rightfully so I should say, Kiritsugu is a perfect example of this utilitarian approach to one's goals since no one is exempted. Kiritsugu Emiya, a very well-written character and compelling as well, one of my personal favorites too, is being held as a standard for Lelouch Britannia. Now, I suppose all this sounds pretty logical to you, and it would be understandable if you find it hard to see any gaps between this argument and ask yourself what exactly it is I'm trying to get at. But if you look closely, you'll see that there is a very obvious issue in all this. Who said Lelouch's philosophy was impartial utilitarianism? He's been operating on the assumption that Lelouch Britannia is a utilitarian who is totally committed to saving the world at whatever cost, with no exceptions. I didn't make this video just to ramble. There's a destination I've been building towards, and it's really the payoff for everything I've said so far. Benefits exist to actually doing the work needed to trace character psychology within the constraints of the narrative rather than result into the easiest way out. It's to be noted that we eventually landed on a couple of facts that we both acknowledge to be true. Lelouch is selfish. His whole reason for starting the rebellion in the first place all came from a personal motivation, revenge against his dad and to create a beautiful world for his sister. But the show does try to present him as a noble, tragic anti-hero. This, in and of itself, is proof of what actual character dissection can lead to. We both went at each other and over time, planned or not, we arrived at a convergent conclusion that made narrative sense. I, and I assume you as well, thought this would lead to compromise and better knowledge of both our standings. But the difference in how we both perceive these selfish human traits Lelouch possesses personifies the whole concept of moral intellectualism I've been addressing. The whole point my panelist was trying to make is that since Lelouch is a human and has some of the less attractive traits any human being would have, he's a bad person and therefore he's a bad character. No one should adore him or appreciate him for being well written. He constantly merges his personal dislike for Lelouch with him being a bad character that shouldn't be praised by anyone, and equates any such praise to an endorsement of his ideology and actions. I don't think any other example could amplify this anymore, considering how strongly it ties back to the point I've been trying to make throughout this video. The qualities he uses to discredit Lelouch are what I value most in characters instead. That moral impurity, that selfishness, that hypocrisy, all of those very human traits that make a character compelling and push you to look beyond just the surface. Those are what make Lelouch fascinating. I mean, in all fairness, I wouldn't argue anyone who calls Lelouch a bad person, but that doesn't mean he's a bad character. His so-called bad qualities are what give him layers, and it is imperative to make that very clear distinction. He can be a bad person morally, but that doesn't make him a badly written character narratively. And this applies not just to Lelouch Britannia, but everyone else within fictional stories. If you made it this far in, you most likely enjoyed this to some degree, so go ahead and subscribe, and I would also appreciate it if you actually engage with the conversation. When evaluating characters, I use personal frameworks of mine, which I call, and please just bear with me here, the wrestle and transical, which basically don't really look at whether characters' actions are morally good or bad. It's all about whether they make sense considering those characters' histories. And when those histories are complicated, they make for very intriguing people who are fun to decipher. Demanding moral purity or judging them based on the checklist of your own personal values not only flatters them as complex people, but also undermines any work the creators did to make them so intriguing in the first place. Engaging with fiction requires you to know when and where to put your personal values aside and appreciate a work of art for being explorative with its own version of morality. That's what makes the stories interesting. If all of them were morally pure or they are aligned with our personal values, we would just be watching reflections of our own preferences and biases. That is regressive in a way, since we are never exposed to any opposition. I believe fictional stories have the right and should be morally grey, so as not to only encourage active mental engagement, but also broaden our horizons and allow us to learn about how history and personal circumstances can shape a person's worldview. Moral purity or personal values should never be a scale for measuring how well written a character or story is. This has been Tambe Bryan. Thank you for watching.